Thank you, Katie, so much for joining us. We're here to discuss your wonderful book, My Murder by Katie Williams. I loved this book so much. Um, I just felt really connected to it and really invested in it when I was on the Notables Committee and read it for the first time. I love a thriller and a mystery, and I felt like this was truly one of like the smartest and funniest ones I've ever read. It had so many good twists, a lot of great commentary about many different like social issues and being a woman, being a mother. And I just thought it was wonderful. So thank you so much for being here for this conversation.
Thank you for talking with me and thank you for saying all those nice things about my book. That made me feel really good.
I'm very glad. I meant all of it.
I'm
Um,
so glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Um, so can you tell us what compelled you to start writing? Like what's some background on your journey?
Yeah, so I was always a reader from the time I was a little itty bitty kid. And that was my favorite thing to do. Summer break was, a stack of books from the library next to the couch, and I was making my way through them. And I think just in general, I loved reading so much. I wanted to, you know, read more intensely, and what's a way of reading more intensely than to like create the object that you read. So like a
Yes.
lot of writers, yeah, my desire to write came out of my love of reading. But like specifically like when the sort of first spark happened for me beyond that was in high school, Okemos High School, Dr. Collar, one of my favorite teachers in our American Lit class junior year, he gave us a creative writing assignment. And it was really the first creative writing assignment I think I'd gotten since maybe elementary school. And it wasn't my own assignment, but a classmate's assignment. It was just, I think we wrote like 3-page short story or something like this. His assignment was so good. I felt so inspired by it. And I wanted to be able to be brought into people's imaginations and into like their bodies and their minds the way he had done with the character he'd written about. And so that was what made me actually try to start writing stories. And so I think about that sometimes as a writer, that amazing kind of good sort of competition of looking at what someone else has done and loving it so much that like it spurs you on to create yourself.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like that, yes, that's a great story. And I feel like it is amazing when someone else can really inspire you to improve your own work and improve yourself. Do you remember what you wrote for that creative writing assignment? The theme or anything?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was, I forget what the assignment itself was actually, but I remember writing something about like some setting of Michigan in the fall, in autumn. So there were some leaves. Yeah, I don't remember. I wish I did.
No, that is okay. Um, do you have like when you think of yourself as a writer, could you choose three words to describe yourself and explain why you chose them?
Yeah, well, the first word that comes to mind is curious. And I think I mean it in both senses of how you could use curious. Writing for me often starts with something I am truly curious about, and even like conflicted about in my own sort of way I've reacted to something in the world. So my murder, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, came out of a very conflicted feeling I had as someone who loves reading murder mysteries. And so whenever there's that kind of inner conflict or curiosity within myself, I always want to sort of dig deeper into that and try to figure it out. And it's things that don't have like easy answers, or at least for me, I can't answer them easily. And even when I've, explored that question and chased it through a book, I don't even know that I have a pat answer at the end besides like the object of the book.
Yes.
So yeah, so curious as in my own curiosity. And then I think my books are kind of curious objects, and I think they're a little odd, which I am not. I mean, that is a good thing, hopefully. I like to blend genres. So, I do some work that's near future, but it also often has mystery thriller aspect in it, a little bit of horror in it. While also having like some of the bones of just like family-centered domestic drama, and literary realism, which was how I was trained. Um, so curious and curious, and then playful. I just really like I love reading mysteries, and one of the things I love most about it, maybe the thing I love the most about it, is that I think it's an excellent game between the writer and the reader, is that they're playing together. And so I hope my books are thoughtful, but I also hope they're a good bit of fun, and that there's that sense of play, um, and exchange between myself and the people who pick up and read my books.
I feel like at least what I got from My Murder, I feel like you absolutely nailed that. Um, it really was like you talking about odd being one of your words and how you cross genres. Like I found that so interesting about the book because the premise, like when you read it, it feels like a bit of sci-fi where they have the technology to replicate these murder victims and then just like the technology is just a little bit advanced, but not too advanced where it feels unrealistic. Like it was really interesting to be able to actually see yourself like in that world that they're living in. And since I live in Lansing, I loved the like I knew I could picture the scenery and like I had my own ideas of like the spots where these murders happened. And I thought that was really interesting. And I did feel like the book was so playful in just like the concept itself being playful and kind of like weaving the stories. But then also I felt like the dialogue was really playful.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, like Louise was just very funny, and her and Silas's banter was like always so delightful to me. And her and Fern's like joking aspect was also just it like made it not too heavy, not too serious, which was like it just made it a delight.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty grim concept, really, right?
Yes.
Like these women have been murdered and then they've been cloned and brought back. And then, like there are questions around the murders. And so, and it's also about sexism and the patriarchy too. I mean, there are
Hmm.
some heavy topics that we don't really maybe feel like smiley or happy about. So yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't intend it to be funny, but I am so glad that readers have felt that it is playful. It has playfulness and light and humor in it, because I think that gives it kind of range or layers or shades. So.
It absolutely does. Um, what can you elaborate on what inspired you to write My Murder?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, it came out of my own sort of conflicted feelings about loving to read murder mysteries and thrillers and watch them. They're one of their genre I loved. Like even when I was a girl, when I was young, I would read, adult murder mysteries, and I loved the game of it. Um, I love too that murder mysteries, they credit readers with being smart. Like it's a game of wits between the author and the reader. So I loved all that about it. But, with that, I always have kind of a funny feeling about it, because a lot of the murder mysteries, they they start with a dead woman on the ground or on the floor in chapter one or chapter two, and she's the murder victim, and everyone else is kind of buzzing around her and trying to figure out, who killed her. And she doesn't have agency or choice in what is arguably her story, which is the story of the end of her life, of her death. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if there's a way I could bring this dead woman on the ground, if I could bring her back. How could I bring her back? And I thought, well, I could do it through flashbacks, but that's already been done and done beautifully. I could do it like having her as a ghost. That's also already been done. In fact, I did that in my second book, so I won't do that again. And I thought, well, maybe I'll bring her literally back. And so that's how I came up with my main character, Louise. She's the murder victim of this famous serial killer, Edward Early. He's been caught, he's confessed, he's awaiting sentencing. Well, he's been sentenced actually. He's awaiting the implementation of his sentencing. And she and the other victims through like this government system or government overseen system have been cloned and brought back. And they're in a support group together. And as the book goes on, she starts to realize there are some questions that she has about her murder. That things aren't really adding up. And so in this way, she becomes not just like the murder victim, she becomes the detective too,
Yeah.
and she gets to solve her own murder mystery.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I love that explanation. And I feel like I wasn't even I don't know why, but I wasn't thinking about that when I was reading, but it is so true. Like that does give her agency. And then like she then has the agency to decide if she wants to like stay in her life and just really, I don't know, be really intentional about living her life, which I think was done so beautifully. Um, what was the most meaningful part of the book for you as an author?
Yeah, two things. One is what we were sort of talking about, that I started out with this idea that I was writing about, my conflicted feelings about murder mystery and giving this, this character who's usually the victim, the role of detective and agency. And
Hmm.
then as I wrote, what became meaningful to me was that the book began to open up and become about not just the specific situation, but it became for me about being a woman in this world in many different ways and many different aspects of that. Um, and then this is going to sound like a trick to make people read the book, but really, the last sentence, the very last sentence, it was one of these moments that you have sometimes when you write and you can't plan for them, and they're kind of like gifts. You sort of hope for them, where I didn't know what that sentence was until I arrived at it. And I was in a coffee shop writing with my friend, the amazing poet and memoirist Rajiv Mohabir, shout out to him. And I knew I was heading toward the end of the book. I knew I was in the final scene, and I arrived at that sentence, and it was just a moment where I don't know, it came to me, and I felt like, yes, and now we're done with the book. So that personally, that's a very personal response, but that personally had a lot of meaning to me as a writer.
Absolutely. I feel like it's so rare that like something immediately becomes like the perfect way to wrap it up. Have you had that experience writing your other books, or was this book the first one where you came to that final sentence and you like knew that it was the end and it was good?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think back to my other novels. I've had it with short stories before, and particularly with
Okay.
reaching that ending sentence. Yeah, I don't think I felt it as strongly with the last sentence as I did with my murder. So
Okay. That's so fascinating. I feel like that is a big win as an author to just feel that
it's like a
confidence.
lift and then like a release. I don't know. People talk about,
Yeah,
it being both, so satisfying and also sad to finish their books.
that's
And
so true.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like you have to grieve the book because it's a project that you've been thinking about so deeply and working on for so long. I'm sure that it's like hard when it's not there.
Yeah, well, and then you have to start another one, and
Yeah,
you
and
have
then
no
it's
words on the
daunting.
page. Yeah, yeah.
That's very true. Uh, what, in your mind, when you wrote this book, what did you want readers to take away from it?
I don't know that I didn't have, a message or a thesis statement when I was writing it. I had those questions and conflicted
Yeah,
feelings I was chasing, but having finished it and being able to look back at it, I think, I guess I would want readers to maybe just, I don't know, have a new perspective on the way we tell stories about women and violence. Maybe just And
Yeah.
not even a new perspective, because it's again, it's not like I want people to come away with like one idea or one thing, but just, maybe a new attention to it. Something to think about and look at a little differently. Um, and then, the one thing that kept ringing in my head as I wrote the book, um, and so I guess if there was like a thesis, it would be this is just to contradict myself, there's no one way to live a life. There's no one right way to live a life and that just sentence
Yeah.
kept repeating in my head sometimes when I would write. It's not a sentence in the book.
Wow. Yeah. I think
I know we
that
can't, yeah, we
that
probably
one
can.
sentence does encapsulate it really well. And I feel like you see that not only with Lou, but also with Fern. And she talks about how she has her old self and then her new self and kind
Yeah.
of trying to rediscover, which I feel like would be like when you put yourself in the place of these characters, it would be so hard. You wouldn't want to go back to your who you were when you had this incredibly like horrible traumatic thing happen to you. So it was, yeah, and then just finding a
Yeah.
new version.
People ask me sometimes, like, why'd what was it for you to have the multiple victims as all his characters? Because it's all his victims, it's five of them who are brought back. And really, when I started, I was just like, oh, I thought this would be an interesting situation to have, these murder victims who've been brought back in a support group together. But
Yeah.
what it became for me as I wrote was just, it became really clear too that there's also no one way to process trauma or walk forward from something like it's so every person has their own way that they're able to sort of work through that. So yeah.
Yes. And I loved the different perspectives from the different victims. Like I thought it was interesting that when the early evening game came out, that Lacey was really surprised and like shocked and kind of hurt that everyone else had played it. But then I believe it was Jazz that like brought a lot of solace to her because it was like I don't know, almost consoling in a way to take back that power through
Mhm.
the game. And so, yeah, I think
Absolutely. And
that was
Angela,
great.
Angela monetizes
Yes.
the experience like that.
Yeah,
She's,
Angela monetizes
I
it.
mean, and go for her. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that's another way to bring back her power, I guess. And then
absolutely.
she turns, or she is suspected to turn the game on its head and literally get back the power in the game, which
Uh-huh.
was, yeah, it was really great to see and kind of see all of the women like banding together
It was
and
fun to
just
write.
that connection. I bet.
I
Absolutely.
knew that scene was coming and I was like excited to get to it.
That's amazing. Was the game aspect something that you had like thought of from the beginning,
It came
or
in,
was it?
yeah, early. I figured out I wanted to do that. So,
Yeah.
I'm not a big video game player, big gamer, but I have a Nintendo Switch, I have a really old PS3. So I do play and I find it a fascinating experience playing video games. As someone who loves art and different forms of art, it is in a
Yes.
way like you are really, as a player, inserting your own agency into the experience in a way that you aren't when you're watching a movie or even reading a book. And yet, like your agency is completely controlled and well, maybe not completely in an open world
Yeah.
game, but is being directed by the game makers. There's this game designer, Fumito Ueda, who he did Ico and Shadow of the Colossus and The Last Guardian, which I can't play because I think it involves like sad things with an animal
Okay.
companion, which I like is
Oh
a
no,
not for
I
me.
couldn't
But
do
anyway,
that
yeah,
either.
he talks about like teaching morals through his games or I don't even know if you'd like the
Oh,
word teaching, but he has a game Ico where you have to hit a button to constantly hold the princess's hand as you take her through the castle. And he says he wants
wow.
people to experience like what it means to really be responsible for another person. And you have to keep hitting the button throughout the
Wow.
game too. And so he's having you go through this physical motion and choose each time to hit the button to take the princess through the castle. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really interesting. philosophy that he and um, I guess like thesis on his games that
Yeah.
uh, they follow.
Yeah, so
That's
it's maybe not
amazing.
just maybe it's kind of like complicity at a certain point, like you're choosing. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Was I just have one more question about the game. Was it I, I feel like occasionally or not occasionally, I think a lot of times society has such a fixation on violence and like horrible events. Was that kind of a commentary on that? Like the fact that a game would be made about the serial killer and his victims? Like it feels like something that unfortunately would happen not in a fictional world. So
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there are games like this that do exist where you play a killer.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, a friend of mine, the writer Jim Seidel, talks about horror movies and the feeling that up until the early aughts, you were asked in horror movies to sympathize with the victim, and then something kind of changed, and now I think he cites it with the Saw movies. You're sort of asked in a way to sympathize with the killer, which is, yeah, and I don't know what that's about.
yeah,
I do think that's part of what's going on with it. And I'm not condemning it or decrying it, though, of course, I have feelings about it, but it is something I do notice. Um, yeah.
yeah. That's really interesting. And then yeah, I really loved the whole game aspect, how the different updates for them they would play as the killer essentially being given that power and then the uprising of the like Angela
Oh, flips.
avatar and character. Yeah, that was really it was really smart and I yeah, I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Um, so your book was chosen as Michigan Notable Book. What was your reaction when you learned about that honor?
Uh, thrilled from the bottom of my socks. Yeah, no, I read it and it meant and means a ton to me. I I was born in Michigan and grew up there, was there until I was 20, and then I've I've not lived there since. My family still lives there, but I've moved around, and I've moved around a lot as my husband and I are both artists, we're both academics, and like with that life comes like you have to move around a lot. And so like of all the I've all the different states I've lived in, like the one constant has been, I grew up in Michigan. It's the place I've lived the longest. And as I've lived so many different places, I've come more and more to see myself and identify as a Michigander, even though I have not lived there
Yeah,
in years. So, to be recognized by the place where I learned to read, where I learned that I loved reading, and where I learned to write, it just meant and means an incredible deal to me.
wonderful. Um, when you found out that you received a Michigan Notable Book Award, um, who is the first person you told? And I guess give us all the info. Why did you tell them first? What was their reaction, and what did their reaction mean to you?
Well, so if I'm, answering the question by the letter, I told my husband first, and he was like, "Oh, great." Um, he's lovely. He's very supportive, but he's kind of like a taciturn guy. But I told my mom, but I had to wait like a minute because she gets really excited, and they told us we had to like keep it. Um,
Oh, yes.
secret for a little bit. So I did. I like waited a beat. She's gonna watch this and feel bad. Mom, I love your enthusiasm. I love your excitement. I told her I was so looking forward to telling her. She lives in East Lansing. Um, I knew it would mean to her something like what it meant to me. Like I knew she would, and when I told her, she was so excited. I mean, she not only, does she live in Michigan, she's a retired school teacher. She loves books. She loves reading. She's in the public libraries every week, multiple times. And so, yeah, so we had a phone celebration. And then when I did the tour for Michigan Notables, I got to visit her and she came with me to a number of the stops. So that meant a lot.
Oh, that's so special.
Yeah.
And I also totally understand that. the mom's excitement, and then
It's like
suddenly
you
they'll be
can't put it on
telling all your
Facebook.
family members, yeah, they'll be posting on Facebook, and you're like, I love that you're so proud of me, but also they told us, yeah, to mum's the word. So no, I totally
Mom
understand
is
that.
the word.
Yes. Um, did you always have it in your mind that this book would be set in Michigan and in the Lansing area, or was it something that you came to later?
No, I didn't. I'm so glad you asked because I was going to mention it earlier. No, the book was originally set in San Francisco, where I lived for a
Oh,
number of
wow.
years. Yeah, and it was just my book before this one takes place in the tech industry. Tell the Machine Goodnight, and it was set in San Francisco. So I think that was just like the setting that was on my mind for near future.
Yeah.
But I started writing it, and it just didn't feel right. It like wasn't working. And I couldn't figure out why. And then I finally figured it out. I think it's the setting. And I think part of it was, I'm writing about a woman who's a clone. And so one of my really important aims when I was writing was to make her feel not like a, facsimile of a person, to make her feel real,
Yeah.
which is always important, right? But like it felt like with her being a clone, I had extra work to do there, or like I could get
Yes.
tripped up. Um, and so I think, resetting the book in Michigan, which is where I had my first memories, my memories from childhood, which, they're so deep, right? Your first tactile memories,
Yeah.
being that really helped me connect to her just real core humanness and physicality. Um, and I think also having it be like this group of women in this, in a town smaller than San Francisco, it helped the story in other ways. It just made a lot of sense. So as soon as I moved it over, the book started moving forward, and I knew that that was the thing I needed to do.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. That was something that I'd been thinking when I was reading it. Like, because I knew you didn't live, I knew you grown up in Michigan,
Yeah,
but didn't currently live there. So I was like, oh, I wonder why you set the book in the Lansing area.
that's right.
And I do think that the setting does like work so perfectly, and especially what you said about the city size, like it does feel, I don't know, just that they
There's
would
some,
be more connected in a way. I don't know,
yeah,
like with
yeah,
the
there were some
public thing.
logistical things that just made a little more
Yeah,
sense. Yeah, and I can't even put my finger on one specifically. It just all seemed to just sort of work a little better.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, okay, the last question, which is going to be hard because I know as a writer and as a reader, it's very hard to like give the book recommendations. As we talked about before. So, but if you could, please, what books currently are giving you joy or making you think, or both?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I prepared, and in fact, I have show and tell. So we'll,
Oh,
we'll let mine.
perfect.
Yeah, no, we'll let mine fly past there again. Yeah. So when I saw this, and I thought a book that's given me joy. So the book that I've read this summer that has given me the most joy, and I think is for going into where I think we're in the next election season, is this book by Kristen Kishore called "There Is a Door in the Darkness." So she's such a lovely writer. She's a young adult writer, and she's known for her high fantasy series. But this book takes place young adult, older young adult. It takes place in Boston. Actually, it takes place in the mid-pandemic, like deep in the pandemic, in the run of
Okay.
the 2020 election. And it's about a girl who's like she's quarantine with her family, and they have some health vulnerabilities. So she's the one who gets sent out to do all the errands, but it's meant she's had to be separated from her close friends. And she is sort of mourning a death of not sort of, she's very much mourning the death of a family member. And these sort of strange magical messages or signs begin to appear in her life. One has to do with a prophecy about a donut. So there's like some humor to it. Um, and she starts following them, and it's about it was for me about like how do you find hope when you feel like you've lost all hope. So it's a really gentle
Yeah.
read. Yeah, and it made me look back too on those days of the pandemic, and just there was a lot I'd forgotten that I can't believe I'd forgotten because it wasn't that long ago. That it helped me just sort of think back on, and I don't know, resolve a little bit. So yeah, so
Well,
this one. And then
thank
for
you.
I have to recommend a mystery, I feel like, because I feel like maybe folks who are watching this will like mysteries. And so the Sister Holiday series, this is the first one by Margot Dwahi, Scorched Grace. This is about a queer punk rock nun in New Orleans, chain smoking, tatted up, and she solves she solves a mystery in each book. And each book there are going to be four in the series. This first one, Scorched Grace, is fire. The uh, second one just came out. Oh, I'm forgetting the title. Blessed Water, I think, is the water book. So there's going to be an earth book and an air book next. So those
Wow.
are very fun. And then books that are making me think. I I'm teaching these two books this semester in my fantasy and sci-fi fiction workshop. One is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, and the other is Ink Blood Sister Scribe by Emma Torres. And they're both, this is a sci-fi fantasy and this is a fantasy. So they're both in those genres, but they also have really excellent sort of mystery plot lines to them too, that I think will surprise you. And they also have a lot to say, in particular about um, magic as a metaphor for power and how power works in
Ooh,
the world.
wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of those. They all sound amazing in their own ways, and I'm definitely going to add them to
Recommend
my
all.
TBR list.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adding them to Goodreads right now. Thank you so much for your time and all of the wonderful answers and insight that you shared through this interview. Once again, I loved your book. Everyone go read it. It's wonderful. Um, and yeah, just thank you for everything.
Estee, thank you so much. And thanks for the thoughtful questions and the excellent conversation. This was a lot of fun.
It really was. Thanks again.